The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on defining key performance indicators, or KPIs. My name is Chris Jorgensen. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Unleash Technologies. For those of you who do not know us already, Unleash Technologies has been dedicated to creating award-winning websites and digital experiences for our association clients since 2007. More than ever before, membership-driven associations need to make sure they establish metrics to ensure their digital experiences are providing value to members. But how should these metrics be created and what data should be considered? This will be the focus of our webinar today. At this time, I'll be turning things over to Michael Spinosa, CEO of Unleash Technologies. Michael has been working with associations for over 11 years to help them achieve their goals online. He is also an active member of both the ASAE and AM&P communities. He currently serves as COO on the board of the American Marketing Association, Washington, D.C. chapter, and has previously spoken at the Association Media and Publishing Annual Meeting, Business Information and Media Summit, and American Marketing Association Annual Meeting. With that, let's get started.
All right, well, thank you, Chris. Hi, everybody. This is Michael Spinosa. This is, in fact, a live webinar. So during this process, I imagine that there'll be a couple ahs and ums. This is a fresh deck. I'm excited to discuss KPIs with you today. What I want to do first is talk about the agenda. So on the agenda, the first thing that I want to do here is I want to look at everything through the lens of a primary web presence. I want to give it context. So when we look at this agenda, let's say that we're looking at a primary web presence. So first thing that we want to do is talk about the KPI history and a redefined KPI. We're going to go over definitions, but a KPI, if you don't know, is a key performance indicator. We want to talk about where did they come from. They've had a very negative connotation in the past. What is the real value of a KPI, and how can we leave the past in the past and use it as the tool that it's meant to be. Next, I want to talk about why do associations need KPIs, why it's important, especially in today's landscape, more so than ever, deploying those KPIs, tracking and growing the KPIs, and just focusing on those important takeaways. Each of these sections will be built out. My goal with any webinar is to provide real value, something tangible that people can sink their teeth into and move forward. So we'll start at the higher level, and as we get further and further, we'll talk about actual process to implementation. So let's say starting from the high end, getting down into the weeds a little bit. So redefining KPIs. So first, a dangerous history, a negative rap, a bright future. So what I mean by that is the KPIs were started originally as something that was a little more dangerous than what we think about today. In the 3rd century was the big first move. Now the Wei dynasty used that as a way to actually control the royal family, their royal family. If they didn't meet metrics, terrible things would happen to them. It was a tool of almost punitive damage, saying you're going to meet these metrics, or we're going to watch you for these things. And if we can't get there, it's not going to be good for you. Now it evolved all the way through to the 19th century, where a Scottish mills started using it, and they would have color-coded logs. Now, I don't know the color of the logs, so I can't answer that. But basically, each individual worker was judged, and you would get a colored log on wherever you were working to define how well you were performing for the mill, which was very interesting. Now, fast forward into the 1900s, and then we talk about the 1990s, but that 20th century, where it was used more effectively. It was used for military performance, particularly in combat. They wanted to be able to track. They wanted to be able to track how people were performing in combat, how they were doing, all the way down to the smallest detail of the organization. Because if you look at the military, still today it's an organization. And then in the 1990s is when it's rumored, because there's no exact date, is where they became very relevant or prevalent in business. They started getting used by organizations to track performance of different divisions, companies overall, and it still was very used as an individual benchmark, which was wrapped into, let's call it, performance evaluations. Now, starting with the classic definition of the KPI, this is the current one. If you Wikipedia'd it, I don't know if that's a word, but I'm going to go with it. If you looked it up, you would find this definition: a quantifiable measure used to evaluate the success of an organization, employee, etc., in meeting objectives for employment or for performance. One thing I would say about this definition is that it's a bit outdated for what we want to do. So I want to talk about why that definition of a key performance indicator isn't going to work for digital transformation, and it is not going to work for the association market. So why doesn't that definition work? Well, the first is KPIs are more than quantitative. They are qualitative as well. When we look at digital transformation, we need to have a firm grasp on the fact that key performance indicators are traditionally been quantitative, meaning there's a metric, we have to hit a number, that number is assigned to whatever objective we are trying to accomplish as an association, as a business, as a digital presence, whatever we're doing. There's a qualitative aspect of that to what we do. Are we necessarily on brand? Can we say that we're uniformed? There's lots of different versions of this that need to be tracked both ways. So we need to start by challenging quantitative and saying quantitative and qualitative. Next is a measurement device for more than just success. As we read the definition today, one of the things that I feel draws it back is it's saying you must hit this metric. What a KPI is to Unleash Technologies and should be to everybody that's leveraging KPIs is it should be a device for continual improvement. Success, once you meet that metric, you're just going to look at what's beyond that and set new expectations. So when we say success, we don't want to create a hard line in the sand. We want to say we're here, we want to be here. We're using this as a tool to find our way through that journey. It's more of a journey tool. It doesn't speak directly to the challenges of a digital landscape. The digital landscape has so much that affects it. I suppose that could be true of anything. But really in the digital landscape, especially in associations, being association specific, we've got marketing suites, we have AMSs, we have the digital presence. A lot of times people have separate email platforms. And then we're trying to bring all these things and remove the scaffolding to have this really succinct experience. But that succinct experience has to drive towards goals. So when we look at a digital landscape, we're going to touch on lots of different areas in the business or I should say the association to hit those goals. Now, and the last thing is the words enforce a negative connotation. It sounds more like a punitive definition, something that's meant to pass judgment on someone. We need to flip the script on what KPIs are for, and this is something we do today. Before I go any farther, I want to point out a couple of things. The methods and practices that you will see today are things that Unleash Technologies deploys today. We deploy them for our clients, we track them for ourselves. Our entire organization at Unleash Technologies is run by this method. And it allows people to do tremendous things. So I'll move forward here and I'll tell you about our version of the KPI definition. It's a goal set to help continually improve the performance of a digital presence and to help an organization meet its business objectives through continual measurement. Just by changing the context of the sentence, it's significantly more open. It's significantly more about learning. It's about finding micro successes within the larger success to continually keep moving forward. Sorry about that. My slide is not advancing. There we go. So why do associations need KPIs? It's time to get focused. So at Unleash Technologies, we have this unique thing that more than 70% of our business is in the association market. We see is lots of RFPs, lots of large builds, but we're still thinking about things in a traditional manner. This in itself is it's counterintuitive to where the association needs to go. If we look at common challenges for the associations, we see, our membership is flat or reducing. We're not growing the way that we want. There's not a new institution of programs. We're having difficulty with engagement. So let's talk about the why. So associations struggling on growth. I don't know that associations today know how to get to growth. So without the tracking, how can we figure out what is growth and what is not growth? I'll talk about how that tracking can be very difficult on the onset, but once you've had it engaged for more than a year, it becomes very easy and it's very empowering. Limited funds misappropriated. Tons of associations, tons of organizations today misappropriate funds in areas that they believe to be successful because they believe them to be successful for the organization or important. When we start deploying key performance indicators and we start tracking different aspects of what's happening in the digital landscape, what we'll quickly realize is those hypotheses are not correct. However, that's not something to be viewed as a failure. That's something to be viewed as a learning tool so that we can start appropriating the funds in the areas where people have the most interest, where it's going to fulfill the association's mission the best. Staying on mission can be difficult with board requests and contributions. So this is one of my favorite. I don't know the suite of people. I see that we have a lot of people on, so there's probably anything from the executive team to the management team, and I would say two parts, whether it's the board or the executive or anybody. When somebody tries to go off track, when we have the KPIs, when we're shooting for something, it helps us limit the distractions in a tremendous way. It says, how does that help us meet one of the 4 KPIs that we have? If that answer isn't clear to everybody, then you should forego it and pass it up, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Declining value with membership online. This is the why slide. So associations are having a difficult time competing with either other associations or commercial businesses online in meeting the expectations of their membership. With our clients, we say this is not only achievable, it can be something that can flourish, but we have to understand what value means to each of those separate groups, to those membership bases, to those future members, to the visitors. If we don't know what that means, then how can we bring value to them? Because there's a constant confusion in the web that a really beautiful website that has modern design practices is value, but it is not value. That is an assumed. You should have that as an assumed for any build or anybody that you're working with internally or externally, that is going to work, that it's going to be a beautiful website. But what we need to understand is, what's the information architecture? Why is that experience important? How is it driving them to what they want? An imbalanced focus on what's important to drive the association. We covered that a little bit in my opinion, with limited funds misappropriated. We're basically saying the same thing there, but we want to make sure that the focus is in the right places for the association and where the value is. Remember, the value, many of the associations have been in business for, if not decades upon decades, hundreds of years. And so the value is going to change over time. And the way that we can face that is by using KPIs, understanding that we need to make pivots. If you've ever read The Lean Startup or something like that, you'll understand a lot about pivots and needing to make changes. No association is going to stay the same over a course of 100 years. Its value is going to be constantly evolving. And finally, we do these huge builds. We build these big websites. These RFPs get released, and we will argue later that the web is fluid and always in motion. But for right now, what we see is, out there, regardless of who does it, these large launches go out, and there's no mechanisms for validation of success. The only validation of success today is we did it, that it launched. But that's not what we should be saying. We should be saying this is the start. This launch is going to help us validate or invalidate our hypothesis on what is going to bring our association success. So that is why KPIs are so important to associations. So establishing and deploying KPIs. I went through some things. I don't know if I should have bumped up defining these things earlier in the presentation, but here it is right now. We're going to define them right now. So we've got 3 major factors that go into KPIs. The first is the key performance indicators are KPIs, and they're measured. Now, we talked about the definition about that earlier. So a KPI is a top-level goal, and we'll talk about how we assign that out. But we don't want any more than 4 to 6 KPIs for our digital transformation. We don't want more than that because we need to be focused on how we're bringing success to key areas. We would often encourage even 3 if it's possible. The lower the amount, the better, because if everybody that's contributing can wrap their heads around success, that's even better. Key system attributes roll up into KPIs. So many, many times people mistake KSAs for KPIs. Those KSAs are different things that are smaller subsets. So if we receive an RFP or we have the opportunity to talk to somebody, they'll say these are our goals. And as we listen to the goals, a lot of times I'll find that those goals are actually key system attributes, things that should be happening anyway. We want KSAs to help dictate what we deploy in the quest for meeting the key performance indicator. And then the whole thing, the whole system is managed by the performance measurement framework. Now, I know I've made this more complicated than it needs to be, but I'm certain that it deploys very easy, and that once you get your handles on it, you'll have great success with this. So the performance measurement framework is what reports and tracks on the KPIs and make sure that we're informing future growth decisions and making adjustments. So establishing goals and expectations. We're really going to start getting into the nitty-gritty here. The first thing that we're going to do when we sit down to do this is, of course, we want to gather our stakeholders, people that matter. Now, I know that in some organizations or associations that KPIs can present a risk to any particular division. So if you're on this today, my guess is based on the purely who Unleashed Technologies is, you're either in the technology sector or you're in the marketing sector. If you're in one of those two sectors, KPIs may have a different feeling for you internally. I would recommend that if you're trying to do something that's going to help you grow and learn and you don't know how it's going to be supported by the greater organization, start internal with your own team and grow from there and create a case study that you can share with the rest of your staff. So business goals can be effective digital key performance indicators. So some organizations will start by setting goals that they have for the year. We like to be very specific about our goals, and I'm going to give you real-world examples in just a minute. But those business goals can roll directly into your digital presences. The reason for that is the world is obviously more digital and online than ever. So when we say we want to increase membership, the vast majority of people are doing most of their membership renewals and their new membership registration online. So how do we connect better with the future member? How can we make that a better process? How can we increase engagement across our articles for our association publications? How can we do certain things? So take those business goals and try to apply them to the digital world. Business goals should influence digital goals. So if we have digital specific goals that we want to accomplish that don't have a greater play into the overall success of the organization, which is rare, by the way, that it's not associated to a larger business goal, but if it is there, we still let those business goals influence those digital goals. We talked earlier, limiting KPIs is very important, and we can't have too many of these. One of the biggest things that we see is people like, we're going to do key performance indicators, it's going to be great. We have 15. You do not have 15. You have 4 to 6, and then you have KSAs. And what we can do is if you come out from your first meeting, grouping everybody together, say, what are we after? What are we going for? Don't limit anyone's thought process. Put everything out on the whiteboard. Get everything out there, and then you can start bucketing it and saying, well, this is actually something that we need for everything. So why don't we move this here? Why don't we move this to KSA? This is something that's an organizational goal, and we hit this for the organization to be successful. Engage key stakeholders. If you're going to try to reach for key performance indicators that touch on membership, events, donations, even if you're establishing these privately, you want to engage them in the creation of the KPI, because I'm going to show you why. KPIs that we're going to recommend are more specific than what you might have dealt with in the past. So we want to know what's realistic. Who knows what's realistic better than the people that are working in that area day to day? Of course, encouraging participation and buy-in. So let me start let me go to the next part, which is reviewing the existing data. While you're assessing these KPIs and all the support, you want to make sure that we have tracking mechanisms that are currently in place. If you're an association, you might recognize IMIS 20, AMS. It could simply be personified, Nimble, Fontiva, any of the tons of names that are there, but it's than just your website and Google Analytics. You're pulling, remember, we're trying to glean actual business intelligence from KPIs. What we're trying to do is see how many visitors we have. That is not a valuable KPI. That is not interesting. Neither is lowering our bounce rate. That might be something that affects, and say, that is just a very tiny component for what you're trying to accomplish with KPIs. So you'll need Google Analytics. Some people know what are like heat map technologies, your AMS. We use a lot of HubSpot here. We're the number one deployer for HubSpot for associations, but you may have Eloqua, you might have or you might have it built into your AMS where you're doing inbound marketing and using inbound marketing tools. We want to make sure that those systems, so how does that relate to us being set up for the tracking? You want to list out all the systems that are going to be part of tracking these KPIs and what contributes to them. Same whiteboard session, same thing. And this will actually be easier than you think, but what will happen is little systems will sneak in as you start to track and actually work with, following the KPI and making sure that those things are happening. But this is a great starting point. So what are some example KPIs? These are very, very specific. These KPIs are some general ones that they're from clients that we've washed and scrubbed a little bit so that numbers, the names and faces are changed to protect the innocent here. So we have some quantitative and KPIs, but let's note the differences. So when we see an RFP or we talk to an association, we usually hear KPIs to have a website, to have a strong user experience for our members, but we can't really quantify that. We can't qualify that goal. So we take those and we change the parameters. Now there is a qualitative goal there, which you'll see at the end. We're going to talk about that. But the first part, where we can't apply quantitative metrics we want to, because to track numbers and then to be qualitative in reaching those goals, it is to not know what the goal is and not have a hard set definition. So to increase membership by 3% per month as compared to year previous. Well, it's self-explanatory, but we don't want to compare it to the month before it. We want to think through our key performance indicators, because if we're comparing January to February, well, maybe no one's paying attention in January because they just got over the holidays. Or we do it from August to September, but everybody's in vacation on August. So we want to compare it to the year previous. How does February of 2019 coming up, compare to February of 2018? And that's how we compare our metrics moving down. That's how we figure out the 3% increase. To reduce direct client support for 20% this year. From a digital perspective, not all goals have to be about driving membership, events, CPE, if you do a lot of continued learning. They don't have to be those things. Some things could be, how do we reduce load on client services to create a better experience? Because in theory, if we're able to reduce the load on client services, then people are having a better experience. And that's how we can think through key performance indicators. So if we want 20% less direct client support, well, we have to be able to measure that. That comes into the AMS. Typically, it comes into the AMS or other support-based tracking that we would have to engage that team for, but it's something that's definitely worthwhile. Another one is increased membership retention. One of the biggest difficulties that associations have that we see as a constant recurring theme amongst KPI is not just increasing how many new members are joining the organization or the reach for their events, etc., is how are they retaining that interest? How are they retaining those members? Now, again, when we look at the lens of how these are written, Each one of these can be accomplished a multitude of different ways, but it's also clear because we have a percentage there what we're striving for. So your mind is probably automatically going to cataloging the highest value versus the lowest value and trying to hit these numbers. So the first place that I see where increased membership retention is auto renewals. I can't tell you how many organizations don't have auto renewals. That's a great KPI to focus on, that people are able to automatically renew their membership while still being notified by an email. Helps increase that retention rate dramatically. If they have that, you go step down the ladder. What's the next lowest hanging fruit? Are we providing the right value for the right person? Maybe it becomes closer to digital experience management. Increased digital engagement and recurring visitors by 20%. For most associations, there's usually a supporting publication or learning platform. We want heavy engagement there. So the way we can track this a multitude of ways across lots of different systems, but this is very important, whether it comes to your magazine, whether it comes to journals, maybe you have direct book when we use, instead of periodicals, we're talking publications. Maybe you even have online living, probably like a journal, but like manuals that people access where they subscribe to. We want to make sure that those things stay relevant. And to maintain consistent branding throughout all digital presence. This is very important. This is qualitative, in my opinion. It's about the quality of the brand. It's about how your brand's deployed. Do you have set fonts? Do you have set colors? Do you have a set brand? Do you have rules around spacing? Do you have special needs for your particular membership that have to be minded? These are all things that can roll up to that consistent branding. It's much more than making sure that every web presence or digital footprint that you have out there have the same logo. It's much, much bigger than that, but it is qualitative and it helps build a story. The same thing for your taglines or defining or developing your message proposition. So I set out some example KSAs. So I told you that Unleashed Technologies drinks its own Kool-Aid, and so it does, and we're going through our own rebuild right now, and I have 10 commandments. Now, these do not all match because I made this association focused, but you can believe that I stole some of those and put them into this presentation. KSAs, now that we can define them, are something that you would think might be a goal if you hadn't walked through the slide deck, if you hadn't heard some of the things I just said. For instance, site must be fully responsive. Well, that should be true for everything that we do to meet our KPIs. There should be no feature, no enhancement, no thing that we touch that should not be fully responsive. So when you think of KSAs, I want you to think of it in the lens of every task that someone does, whether it's a digital firm such as Unleashed Technologies or your internal staff. They should follow all these rules for everything that they do when they're working on the site to make it bigger, better, bolder than it was before. Should be fully responsive. The new contact conversion forms must be able to be A/B tested. So I can't tell you how many people are like, oh, we got a form up and we're going to do this. Well, how do we test it? Oh, we can't do that, so just adjust the one that we have. You should have, we should start building in those capabilities for A/B testing. We should be able to move quickly, and some of these things are newer to associations that may not be able to move as nimbly. Visitor experience must be seamless at all times. Why do we bring up seamless? Because the visitors first. One of the most common things I see in associations is because staff is so over. They look for automation in the back end first above visitor experience. And you must define for your particular organization what is more important. So there'll be a lot of talk about automating tasks to get more time back to do other things, but really, if we're working with a public-facing digital presence, shouldn't we be focused on the visitor-based items first? And the most important is that they have a seamless experience at all times. If we have to do some extra work on the back, I think that's worth it to make sure that the deployment is what it needs to be and that we can meet those KPIs. Features must directly correlate to KPIs. That is a KSA. It's like reminding us that if we hear something that we don't want or that doesn't make sense, because the fact that you don't want it and that it doesn't make sense, usually it's causative to each other, but you need to say, well, how does that help us accomplish our KPIs? It gives you the platform to push back on ideas. Because one thing is true about any digital presence I've worked on or this company has worked on is it's really easy to put a ton of new features in. It's really hard to take them out. I can't tell you how many times I've taken out features. Now that is more and more as each new client we're doing KPIs and KSAs, and we have been for the last 2 years, bringing that commercial value to the association market. When we do that, what we found is that, oh, excuse me, one second. What we have found is they're able to stay on goal. They're able to stay on focus for what needs to happen. Testing and tracking of existing journeys is required. So if you're not using personas and user journeys today, that's I believe there is actually another webinar that we did on user journeys and personas that is free and available without the contact information. Feel free to grab it, but you want to use those in the discovery of KPIs, and you use those as a track. So if we know a certain user journey to a T, I mean, we want to make sure that we're constantly refining that user journey. Because we set up something to capture membership doesn't mean it's working the most efficiently. Is the messaging right? Is the flow correct? Do people feel like the value proposition is there? Is it technically sound? Site must load under 2.5 seconds. I think that this is a standard pretty much across the entire internet. It might even be a little high. That is easier said than done sometimes, because if you're not using decoupled architectures or you're very heavy on imagery and you want to make a certain level impact, it's harder to achieve that than you think. You can use tiered loading or things like that to help accomplish that. But again, when someone is deploying a new feature in line with trying to meet your KPIs, they should be thinking about that. Like, if I'm deploying it this way, am I going to meet that 2.5 second load time? To create a modern design in line with visitor expectations. Again, this is something we see all the time as a goal or a KPI, but really it's a KSA. And that KSA is to make sure the design team remembers that they should always be moving the design forward. Another thing that we think is when we build a new digital presence, that it's done. Both in design and development, these things should constantly be moving forward. I like to use the analogy of the Simpsons. So if the Simpsons have been on, I'm going to guess 20 years. I'm not the biggest fan in the world. I'm more of a Family Guy guy. But the Simpsons are a great show. And from the beginning, if you watch the drawing, it slowly evolves all the way through. From all the way back to Tracy Ullman, and I'm old enough to remember, it became its own thing all the way through. You see the characters are they're continually improved. But you don't know that. That's the glory of it, is we're extending the shelf life of digital presences while increasing their performance. So instead of looking things as a monolithic build, because we always have to do that initial lift, you should view that as the starting point. Ensure that the website adheres to ADA standards. This day, compliancy, you might have called it 508 in a previous life, is very important. So you want to make sure that you understand at what level you're willing to adhere to. I think there's 3 levels. I'm not a full expert in that area, but the staff is. And you want to make sure that everything that you do meets that metric. Membership sign-up must complete in 3 clicks. Again, one I made up. Like, maybe today it takes 5 clicks. Maybe it takes 2. Maybe you want it down to 1. It's a 1-pager. We want to test the theory. For instance, this is another great theory to test in terms of our KPI, is that we want to increase membership by 3%. Half of a group will say 1 page is the way to get membership to sign up. They go through 1 page and then they click and it's done. Other people will say you need to split it up. The first page is what type of membership they want. The next page is their contact information. The next page is their billing, but it allows them to step through so they feel like they're making progress, not filling out some massive form. The real answer is it's whatever your visitors respond to, whatever your membership responds to. So there is no best practice between those 2 practices. It's what do your members like? What do your visitors like? What are they responding to better? What's giving you the conversion rate? This also ties into A/B testing. So we want to understand these different. Now, all changes to website website must abide by the digital brand guidelines. So when we abide by the digital brand guidelines, I think that's very important. So one of the things that we do as a KSA is inside the website, we have a hidden page. Don't go looking for it on our websites now, all right? But it's hidden, it's behind the wall, but it has every header, title, font, style, color, everything, and it's built into the system. It helps us protect that brand integrity. But you want to make sure that everybody that's working on the site is operating from that same sheet of music. So these are just examples of KSAs, but KSAs have no limit. You may have as many key system attributes as you want. Why I like to go with the 10 commandments is because it's memorable, and these are the most important things. You could have a list of 50, but the chances that people are going to deploy on a list of 50 is very low. Whereas these could be memorized, and they're just in the back of everyone's head while they're doing that work, while they're contributing to the digital platform. This isn't just development stuff. This can be anything that involves the digital presence, meaning if the KPI, you have people that are just modifying content or bringing their magazine and their articles into here. You want to make sure that they're going to upload their own images. You want to make sure they're web ready. They should be trained to do that, or at least know that, like, if I upload a 20 meg photo, a 100 meg photo without optimizing it, I'm going to have an impact on how fast this page is going to load and an overall impact on the site. Or that if I bring content in a certain way and I don't do my alt tags or my title, I'm not going to be WCAG 2.0 compliant. So that it really touches all parts of the organization. Now, we did all AMSs here, but deploying proper tracking, we talked about that. So we have let's back up. We have KPIs, we have KSAs, we've finalized them. We have our list of, let's call it 4 KPIs. We have our list of KSAs, and we're going to pretend we'll just go with these. Now we need to analyze what systems we need to track over. Again, this could be a myriad of things. We just want to show you the AMSs. But the AMSs are a major component to this, not just the web presence, because the AMSs have a ton of data that helps us validate what's happening, because even Google Analytics or whatever version of whatever analytical platform you're using to track the data that's coming off the website needs a check and balance, vice versa. So by having all these systems cataloged, we can start grabbing them. Now, many groups, probably even the ones on this webinar today, are already tracking across all these systems. But I would argue, what are you tracking? My guess is that you have a set of standard reports, but we want to take data from these systems and then apply business intelligence to it. We want to apply our working mind to it. So again, back to the old visitors example, which everybody knows from 10 years ago. Nobody cares how many visitors you get. At Unleash Technologies, what we care about is how many conversions we get, how many people reach out to us. So if I have 30,000 visitors or I have 10,000 visitors, what I care about is that 30,000 visitors, if the amount of opportunities we have doesn't go up, that traffic isn't worth a lot to us. And I think vice versa, like if we have 10,000, but it's very meaningful people and they're the right targeted group, and we have more opportunities coming in, then we would prefer that. But we really stick to that. I think what happens a lot of times when people look at KPIs, they say, oh man, yeah, that's great. I see that the 10,000 visitors is actually yielding to, 30 qualified people, but I really like to just have both. You can work towards that, but focus on the lower and understand that targeting that smaller group is probably better for you. Pull data from each system and start comprising it. Don't overthink it. That spreadsheet is not secret there. It's just something we pulled randomly. So I don't want you to overlook into the spreadsheet, but start with a spreadsheet. When we started tracking KPIs across every aspect of Unleash Technologies, and this applies the same to associations, I started with a spreadsheet. We started with the spreadsheet and said, I'm going to track these numbers and this data, and then as this data builds, I'm going to correlate this to behavior. I'm going to correlate this to future actions that we need to take, and we all started growing into it. I think a common misconception is We're going to do KPIs. Well, we need a system. We need to have a dashboard to mash it all up and do these things so it's easy for us to access. You do need that, but you don't need that right now to get started. The key to KPIs and to moving forward in your digital presence and tracking the right things is to just take the bite. If you're not sure how to do that, bring in a consultant, but take the bite. Don't sit there and wait for every system to align and all the big budgets to align. Right now, we can dump it all into a spreadsheet. One of the things that we'll talk about in the future slide, which I'll go right into, is tracking of the KPIs. We're validating, correcting, making future decisions, and testing your hypothesis. So if we're coming off of a giant website build, all we did was make a bunch of hypotheses. We may have hypotheses. I don't know how many is's are on that, but we take that piece and we say, we believe that we're building it like this and doing it like this because it will have the following outcomes. So when that site launches, those KPIs and KSAs are already in place. With them in place, we immediately start tracking on a regular basis. Now, you can track them on a dashboard, and there's tons of free suites out there to do that. So, for instance, Data Studio from Google is free. It pulls, of course, their analytics, but it can also pull from Google Sheets. So remember when we talked about working from a spreadsheet? You could work from a Google Sheet, pull the definitions there, and then it makes it easier for executives or management level people to track how we're tracking the goal. One of the things that we haven't talked about yet is how we make changes according to that. And it starts with a check-in schedule on the KPIs. We have to give enough time to figure out if what we thought was correct was correct. So assessment cycles and review. We want to assess, so that's where we come in. So we launched a new site, or maybe it's an existing site that we built 6 months ago, 3 months ago, a year ago, and we want to leverage it there. There's no difference between these two strategies. I want to make that clear. Once the KPIs and KSAs are in place, we can move forward. In fact, I would say there's a small advantage to people that are leveraging an existing asset because they know what they've got, and if they have been tracking if they've been tracking the whole time or have the raw data, we can glean back over a certain amount of time. So we want to assign proper review cycles to establish KPIs. So I'd like to say the shortest timeline is a month. That's not always true. If you do A/B testing, it might be you could do 2 weeks, you could do a week, but the more you check in on it, it's all based on volume. If you don't have enough volume, you want to give it more time to figure out what's happening. So when we review a KPI on a monthly basis, we say, okay, we're comparing back to our example, February of 2019 to February 2018. Did we hit our goal? No. We did only grew by 1%, or it was flat. Okay, the why. So now we have all this other data that we've been pulling associated to other KPIs, which is what was the member retention? How many people hit this page or walk through this process? Why didn't they get through it? That's where you start setting up you slowly start chipping away at, well, what do we need to track to figure that out? What do we need to figure out? And so as you're learning and you're doing more tactical things to figure out what's happening, the strategy in your mind starts to build. The hardest part is figuring out what action to take from the data. So we didn't hit 3%. Why didn't we hit 3%? Well, I don't know. And everybody stares at each other. This will be a process that you live through. This will happen. And we're like, well, why are we doing this if we don't know why? And so we'll say, well, what happened here? Is it because the bottom fell out on the renewals? Is it how many people went through this process? You start asking questions. Once you start asking questions, you develop new ways to get those answers. Those answers become part of your monthly review and help dictate what's happening. Start saying, well, let's track the funnel. Giving an example, that's part of the assessment, the cycle. Do appropriate review for KSAs up front of development, which means, if you're going to do something new, that always needs to be in the forefront. Just make sure that that's in the front. A little oddly placed in the slide, actually, but for your teams, the thing to take away from that is if you're addressing the KSAs up front, it removes the element on the back when you're reviewing the KPIs. And that's what you want to happen. You don't want to say, oh, it's because it doesn't load in under 2.5 seconds. You may want to revalidate that, but you don't want to always be questioning if you were following your core rules in the process. Share the dashboards and findings with the team. At Unleash Technologies, if you walk around these offices, everybody is very open to failure because failure is a lesson. Failure is a gateway. And when you share the findings and what's happened with the team, it's not that we missed the mission. I think the biggest concern is, especially after a big build, you've spent a couple $100,000 or whatever's happened building this brand new website, and then it doesn't hit the metrics. What you've done is first things first, you've created an amazing tool to figure out how to hit the metrics to grow with. And you need to take that for what it is. You made hypotheses, not all of them worked out. Now you have to do the adjustments. That's just the way that the web is always going to be. And the expectations of your client sets are always going to change. So when we miss, it's more and more opportunities to get closer and closer to the people that you're trying to serve internally and externally. Share it with everyone. Hold a 1-hour meeting for brainstorming once a month or as needed. Basically, I would recommend it when you're doing the review cycles, be like, this is what's come back. This is what we put together. It's what's in the spreadsheet or our dashboard if we have it. And here's where we were successful, and here's where we weren't. What do you think? And open up the floor. Have an open conversation about it. Sometimes it's best to go one by one to get ideas out on the table on a whiteboard session. Highly recommend that. And management. Trust team assessments, encourage repeated failure. That's to the E-suite and the managers that are on the phone today. If you do not encourage them to take risks, your team members to take risks and to figure out how they can find success and support that failure, understanding that it's a learning step, then they won't have the courage or the wherewithal to be able to continually push the ball forward, because they're going to get discouraged. You might have 4 KPIs and 2 might be going great. 1 you're slowly getting a handle on, and 1 is just giving you the toughest stuff. And you have to realize that everybody's going to try to work through that together as a team. That if anybody had the answer, they would have already deployed it. It would have already happened. It doesn't make them any less intelligent, so we want to make sure that we're supporting their efforts at all times. Tracking changes. So this is a big part. This is where it's a little, the hardest part is setting up the KPIs, the KSAs, and doing a spreadsheet and understanding what's happened. The second hardest part is tracking what you've done in the past to affect the future of the KPI. So for instance, if going back, we're using membership all through this. So if we have the membership example and somebody says, what if we try, instead of that multi-page process, we try the singular page process, and there's some kind of adjustment. It goes up 3% and we hit the metric, and that's great. We want to make sure that when we're trying to hit the new 3% beyond that, because remember, KPIs adjust. Usually I like to think of KPIs as an annuity, meaning we want to track for a year, we want to go against those KPIs, and then we want to upgrade. We want to say, this is where we got, this is where we are. For instance, this year marketing had a KPI in Unleash Technologies that was so easy that we had to upgrade it because it was, but that's a rarity. All the rest of the KPIs were working. And I don't want to say it was so easy. I'm going to say my marketing team was so good that they hit it with no sweat, so I had to keep them challenged. But you want to make sure that somebody 4 months later doesn't come through and say, we need to go to a multi-page checkout. Well, you already learned that lesson. You're going to learn it twice. So you don't want to do that. You want to look at the history of what's happened with your KPIs and be able to highlight the major milestones, like the big changes that had a large impact. So if that person left the organization, the new person comes in and says that, you can say, well, here's the history of the KPIs, what we tracked and what's happened. You want to check on that monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, and annually. I know this sounds like a lot and it's taking a lot out of your schedule, but it's not, because when you get really good in the system, everybody starts operating natively to it, and it just becomes part of what you do. And that's the most important part. I was going to say it's going to take a solid 6 to 9 months to make this to part of what you do, but it's so ingrained, it doesn't take a minute out of your day to be tracking. You just know that you're moving this over here, you're doing this, and then you're going to have this meeting. You've been collecting your ideas, writing notes down as you're seeing things unfold. Remember, the people in the trenches act far more frequently. What I mean by that is, so if you have, like, for instance, Unleash Technologies is, we are your augmented web team. if you have internal web team, we're always making changes to try to hit these goals, and we're always interfacing with you on the new enhancements you want. As a consultative body, we're going to tell you our opinions on how we think things are going to be effective, what you should do. We're not operating on a monthly basis. We're operating on a daily basis. So there are people that are constantly engaged trying to find ways to hit that goal, but we're deploying the ideas that come out, and those are happening all during the period there. So track the changes, know the changes. Takeaways. So this is like the wrap up. I don't know if I've gone too long. I've gone a little long, but takeaways. KPIs, KSAs, and the PMF tool are for continual course correction and validating assumptions. Figure out if you were right. If you weren't, make a course correction. If you were partly right, make a course correction. If it can be even better, make a course correction. Depending on the KPI, it's important to allow the appropriate time to validate things and changes. If you're going to make a change, we talked a little bit about this, volume dictates. So if you don't have a significant amount of web traffic, or part of the KPI is to build that up, then we don't have enough data to constantly be switching past. We need to have enough data to switch past. Leverage data to help dispel or association myths. This is one of the biggest ones. Is many times I've been involved with organizations where there's a group of people say this is the most important thing to the organization, but even our brief review of analytics or what's happening or how people are interfacing with it shows that that's not true. But that is not what wants to be heard. So you have to use the data to help you make those cases, because you can't hit KPIs if you're always after the wrong fish. Don't let KSAs get forgotten. Make sure they're a crucial part in your quest for success, and failures are the building blocks to success in understanding the value of your digital platform. There is no such thing as failure. There are only lessons learned. And you will make repeated failures, and sometimes the same one twice. But as long as everybody's working to the betterment of the association, it's going to be a success. They're going to find the way. That is it for me.
Thank you, Mike. So we do have time for questions. If you want to use the GoToWebinar feature and type in your question to us, we'd be happy to take a few of those. We have a few in the bucket already, so we'll jump right in. Mike, should offline KPIs also be created for goals outside of the website? Is a question from John.
Yes. So outside of the website is important because there's different. I use the example as the digital web presence or the primary web presence as what we're using for KPIs, but it's anything that interfaces or connects to the larger goal. We need to have KPIs for that. So that could spread across multiple divisions. That could have different aspects of just pure business, particularly when you come to events. While the website has a role in event sign up and event management, there's also got to be a ton of KPIs focused around the digital success of how well the event actually goes. So the answer is yes.
Awesome. Our next question comes from Kate, and she says, as an executive director, how can I prevent the creation of KPIs from turning into a negative process with my stakeholders?
There's two ways to do this. So the first way, and there really is two ways to do this because every environment is dynamic and every set of management is different. You have to understand what's going to resonate. The first way is the one we talked about where you work inside your division and you work on this model inside, and then when it starts gaining traction and success, you share it with upper management. That helps you avoid the negativity because you're keeping it as something you're using as a test bed. The other way is the complete opposite, which is invest them immediately and say, this is what we want to do and why we want to do it. I know that we can hit these goals, but we have to be tracking in a different way. I think that we're going to meet with success and failures and start with a sit-down, honest conversation of what they're for. If you set the table, if you tell the story on why and how we're leveraging them, then that is the lens in which they will take it. So either of those two models will work. I've seen it both ways.
Our next question comes from Matt, and he says, what is the difference between a lagging KPI and a leading KPI?
A lagging KPI and a leading KPI. I don't know that I use that terminology. That's a great one, actually. For me, a leading KPI, if you're using leading and lagging in the terms of leading is the most important, lagging are the ones that are further down on the list. What I would say is a leading KPI directly affects the mission of the association, and what they are trying to fulfill, what the directive of the CEO is, what the directive of the organization is. Lagging KPIs to me would be, I'm trying to think of a great example. It would be, here's why I would say there's no lagging KPIs, Chris. I would challenge that, because if it's important enough to make the KPI list, it can't be lagging. There's only 4 to 6. So I would say there are no lagging KPIs. Now, if you have 10 KPIs, you have too many, and then there are absolutely lagging KPIs, but you shouldn't. You should only have 4. So that's not a battle that our customers have or our clients have.
Our next question comes from Jessica, and she says, can KPIs include financial goals?
Absolutely. I would say, for an association, it's interesting. When we look at classic business models from Jim Collins, would say good to great. I don't know who's familiar with good to great on the phone, but in the business, it always is $1 in equals a certain output financially, and that defines success in the business world. Well, the association market's one of the only worlds where $1 in doesn't necessarily equate to $1 out. So absolutely, it can equate to you can include financial goals, you cannot include financial goals. I know the way our clients use them is almost everybody has some financial standard inside their KPIs. Like a lot of times they'll echo if they're doing a lot of continued professional learning or something like that, they will track towards revenue into financial goals as opposed to like membership where we talk about a 3% increase. So financial goals are definitely important. In fact, I would say I don't know of a single client, including Unleash Technologies, that doesn't have financials inside of their KPIs. There's always some spirit of that.
Mike, our next question comes from Andrew, who asks, what is the difference between organizational and operational KPIs? And you might have already touched on this, but
sometimes a lot is so gray that it's tough to say. Organizational KPIs are always very about the strategy. Operational KPIs are a little more tactical in nature. Even though we try to keep tactics in KSAs, some things are still KPIs. I'm trying to think of a really great example. Like to me, the client services example, where we said we want to reduce the amount of direct member services to 20%. That is an operational KPI to me. It's not core to understanding the vision, but it's a better experience for the people that interface with the association. So to me, that is an operational KPI. An organizational KPI is probably the one we talked about, where it's like increase engagement with content and convert more members, right? Because we need money to fill mission. Mission is everything to an association.
And then, Mike, I have a question for you. We've covered a lot of ground here today. If someone's watching this today, what is the one takeaway above everything that you want them to come away with?
If you're not doing this process, you should start tomorrow. We're happy to help here at Unleash Technologies, but no matter what, whether you need our help or not, this is something that you should be doing. And it should. So when we engage around the digital presences, because that's what we do, but you should not be waiting on this process. Associations need to take on these practices, be driving them forward in a diligent way for them to not only remain relevant, but grow. I'm so tired of the remain relevant stuff. I'm more into the how are we growing, how are we thriving, how are we getting big? And KPIs, to my opinion, are the gateway to that, because everybody's tracking towards a common goal. Everybody gets a mission, but they don't know how to apply what they know to that mission. KPIs give the performance framework, give the opportunity to understand how they can best contribute, and that is very important.
Great. Well, I think that's a pretty good stopping point. We are at the hour mark here. First, thanks to everyone who joined us today so close to the holiday season. We do a monthly webinar series, and we'll be continuing this series in 2019. So we hope to see all of you for one of those. And on behalf of Mike and our entire team here at Unleash Technologies, thank you for joining us today.